Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we are drifting into the vast and complicated story of the American West. A place shaped by sweeping landscapes, bold hopes, broken promises, and lives lived at the edge of the known world. This is a history of movement and collision, of ancient nations who knew the land deeply and newcomers who believed it held endless possibility, of trails carved by footsteps and wheels, and borders drawn and redrawn through conflict, compromise, and ambition. The American West is often remembered as a backdrop for legends, but beneath those stories lies something far richer. It is a place where survival demanded creativity, where technology raced ahead of law, and where ideas about freedom, ownership, and identity were tested again and again. Every valley, river, and rail line carries echoes of choices that still shape life today. The past here is not distant. It is layered, unresolved, and still speaking. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. For now, allow your breathing to slow. Let your shoulders soften and your thoughts loosen their grip. Simply settle in as we travel through this remarkable chapter of history together. Let's begin. In 1848, gold at Sutter's Mill ignited a global stampede. A few bright flakes in a riverbank became news that traveled faster than common sense. Within months, ships, wagons, and long marching lines carried people toward California from the eastern states, Latin America, Europe, Australia, and China. The journey itself could be a gamble, since disease, shipwrecks, and bad timing destroyed many plans before anyone saw a river. Those who arrived found prices that felt unreal, since eggs, boots, and shovels could cost a fortune in a hungry camp. Mining methods shifted quickly from lone panning to organized crews with heavy equipment. Towns sprang up where money moved, then collapsed when claims emptied. The rush also created new laws, new violence, and new dreams of reinvention. It did not only change California, it changed the world's maps of opportunity. The Transcontinental Railroad joined oceans in 1869 at Promontory Summit. Two rail crews raced across deserts and mountains, driven by contracts, pride, and the hunger to win territory. Tracks climbed the Sierra Nevada through blasting and hand labor, then pushed east across salt flats and open basins. The work was deadly, since avalanches, explosions, and harsh camps claimed lives that rarely made headlines. When the final rails met in Utah, coast-to-coast travel changed from months to about a week. That speed transformed mail, markets, and migration because people could move with fewer supplies and less fear of isolation. Towns rose beside stations and water stops, then became permanent dots on the map. The railroad also tied western resources to eastern factories, pulling timber, cattle, ore, and wheat into national supply chains. It stitched the country together, and it tightened control over distant places. The West's borders were redrawn by the Mexican-American War and its treaty. In the mid-19th century, a conflict between two nations reshaped a continent's political layout. Battles ended, but the map did not settle quietly. The treaty transferred vast territories to the United States, including lands that would become California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. People already living there woke up in a new country without moving an inch. Spanish and Mexican land grants suddenly faced unfamiliar courts, new paperwork, and costly legal fights. Some families held on, while others lost ranches through debt, fraud, or endless delays. New English place names appeared beside older Spanish ones, and a bilingual borderland became a contested zone of identity. The change also set the stage for later statehood, mining booms, and migration waves. A single document on a negotiating table reshaped millions of lives, and it still echoes in today's border debates. The Homestead Act offered 160 acres, if you lived on it. On paper, it sounded like a simple bargain between a person and a nation. Stake your claim, build a home, farm the soil, and the land becomes yours. In practice, the promise was both hopeful and punishing. Families arrived to find treeless plains where lumber was scarce, so some built sod houses that were cool in summer and fragile in storms. Drought, grasshoppers, and brutal winters could erase years of work in a season. Women often carried crushing labor, running households while also planting and harvesting. Speculators and railroads sometimes worked the system, shaping who benefited and who lost. The act also sat on top of earlier dispossession, since the land offered to newcomers had long histories of native use and governance. Still, for many, this policy defined what starting over could mean. The bison slaughter nearly erased Plains lifeways within a single generation. For many Plains communities, bison were not only food, they were shelter, tools, clothing, and a center of ceremony and season. Then hide hunters, rail access, and commercial markets turned living herds into commodities. Rifles and trains made killing fast, and piles of bones became a business of their own. Some hunters took only tongues or hides, leaving the rest to rot. The scale was staggering, and the consequences arrived quickly. With herds collapsing, hunger spread and dependence on government rations increased. That vulnerability was then used to pressure nations into confinement and treaty concessions. Grasslands that had moved to the rhythm of migrating animals fell into a new ecological balance, with cattle often replacing bison. The tragedy was not only environmental, it was cultural, political, and spiritual, since a whole way of life was attacked through the destruction of its foundation. Few events show cause and effect so brutally. The Comstock lode made Nevada rich and transformed mining technology fast. When silver was discovered near Virginia City, miners first celebrated, then panicked. The ore was complex and deep, and simple methods could not keep up with the scale. That challenge forced innovations, including new ways to crush rock, separate metals, and pump water from flooding shafts. Engineers developed processes that influenced mining far beyond Nevada. Money poured in, and so did people, since every rumor of a new strike could launch another rush. The region's wealth helped finance banks, railroads, and political power, while also attracting crime and corruption. Working conditions could be brutal. Kvins, poisonous dust, and fire were constant threats underground. Above ground, a rough city life grew around saloons, newspapers, and ambitious dreams. The Comstock story is not just about treasure. It is about how a single deposit can accelerate technology, urban growth, and risk-taking all at once, then leave a scarred landscape behind. Barbed wire ended much of the open range, one fence line at a time. Before cheap fencing, much of the West operated on movement. Cattle followed grass and water across unfenced land, and ranchers relied on shared space and informal understandings. Barbed wire changed the rules with a simple design that could be stretched for miles. Suddenly, a man could claim control over pasture, springs, and river crossings. That control brought stability for some, since herds could be managed and breeding improved. It also brought conflict, because fences blocked long-used routes and cut off access to water. Fence cutting became a form of sabotage, and range wars turned neighbor against neighbor. In some places, lawmakers stepped in to regulate how and where fencing could happen. The shift also altered the landscape's ecology, since migration patterns for animals changed and overgrazing could concentrate. This invention did not look dramatic, yet it quietly transformed property, power, and daily life. Cattle drives moved millions of longhorns and built boomtown railheads overnight. After the Civil War, Texas cattle were plentiful, and eastern demand for beef was rising fast. The problem was distance, since there were few rail connections in cattle country. So drovers pushed herds north for weeks, guiding thousands of animals across rivers, plains, and unpredictable weather. On the trail, every day required hard choices about pace, water, and risk. Stampedes could erupt from thunder, wolves, or a sudden shout in the dark. When the herds reached railheads like Abilene and Dodge City, money exploded into towns built for quick transactions. Saloons, hotels, and stockyards appeared, and so did gamblers and swindlers eager for a cut. The drives also depended on skilled labor from many backgrounds, including Black and Mexican cowboys, whose stories were later minimized. This system did not last forever, but for a few decades it shaped food markets, town growth, and the mythology of the cowboy. The West became a battleground of law, violence, and rapid new rules. Frontier communities had to invent order while everything around them was shifting. A town could form in a week, then face disputes over claims, wages, stolen horses, and unpaid debts. Sometimes a sheriff arrived late, or not at all, so residents formed committees and improvised courts. Those systems could protect people from chaos, but they could also become tools for intimidation. Violence often flared where money and uncertainty met, especially in boom towns and along transport routes. At the same time, formal institutions expanded quickly, including territorial governments, marshals, and judges sent from distant capitals. Newspapers helped shape public pressure by naming suspects and inflaming fear. The result was a constant negotiation over who had authority and what justice meant. The West was not simply lawless, and it was not simply civilized. It was a place where rules were written in real time, under stress, with human lives on the line. The American West was shaped by native nations long before any settlers arrived. Long before widen ruts and rail lines, hundreds of distinct peoples managed these lands with deep local knowledge. Some built canal systems that turned desert into fields. Others shaped forests with deliberate burning that encouraged fresh growth for game. Trade routes linked coasts, plains, and mountains, moving shells, obsidian, salt, hides, and stories across immense distances. Diplomacy mattered as much as hunting, since alliances could open safe passage through another nation's territory. Languages and ceremonies carried history with precision, even without written alphabets. When newcomers finally pushed inland, they entered a world that already had boundaries, laws, and sacred places. Much of what later Americans called wilderness was a lived-in homeland. Understanding that changes every later chapter, because it reveals who was already here and what was already working. Cholera outbreaks haunted overland routes more than most gunfights ever did. On the trail, the most frightening enemy was often invisible. Cholera spread through contaminated water, and it could strike with shocking speed. A person might feel fine at breakfast, then collapse by afternoon with dehydration that drained the body of strength. Wagon trains tried to protect themselves with rules. They camped upstream from others when possible. They avoided suspicious water. They buried waste away from rivers and springs. Even with care, outbreaks could tear through a camp because travelers shared buckets, cookware, and crowded spaces. Panic followed, since no one knew who would be next. Families sometimes abandoned possessions to move faster, hoping distance would mean safety. Many did not understand the cause, so rumors flourished and blame traveled faster than the disease. The impact was profound. It changed decisions, slowed migrations, and filled the trail with hurried funerals. The West was dangerous, but not always in the ways people imagined. The Oregon Trail carried tens of thousands, and many never reached Oregon. For families staring at crowded farms and scarce opportunity, the promise of fertile valleys sounded like a new beginning. The reality began the moment wheels rolled onto the plains. Wagons broke axles, animals went lame, and a simple injury could become a crisis when the nearest doctor was weeks away. People learned to read the land like a clock, leaving early to beat heat and stopping before darkness erased the trail. Rivers were the great tests. Some crossed on makeshift ferries. Others risked a ford and watched food, tools, and keepsakes vanish downstream. Graves appeared beside the track, sometimes marked, sometimes not. Still, the line of wagons kept moving, driven by stubborn hope. When survivors finally reached the Northwest, they did not find an empty paradise. They found hard work waiting, and a life rebuilt from the ground up. The Santa Fe Trail tied Missouri markets to New Mexico trade. This route was not only a path of wagons. It was a moving marketplace that linked distant economies through grit and negotiation. Merchants left towns along the Missouri River with manufactured goods, cloth, tools, and ideas packed into creaking loads. Weeks later, they arrived in New Mexico with items that could reshape local prices and daily life. The return trip carried silver, mules, wool, and other goods that Eastern buyers wanted. Travel demanded planning, since waterholes could be far apart and grass could disappear in a dry season. Danger came in many forms. Storms could bury tracks. Misread distances could kill livestock. Political tension also mattered because the trail passed through contested spaces where authority shifted. Over time, the commerce helped knit together cultures that spoke different languages and kept different customs. It also turned the West into something more connected and more complicated. Wagon trains depended on rivers, springs, and written guidebooks for survival. A wagon train looked like freedom from a distance, yet it was a moving problem that needed constant solutions. Water decided everything. The group rose early, hunted for reliable springs, and watched the sky because one dry stretch could undo a whole journey. People carried guidebooks that described landmarks, distances, and warnings. Some were lifesavers. Others were wrong, or outdated, or based on luck instead of evidence. Travelers argued over which advice to trust, then paid for mistakes with broken wagons and exhausted animals. River crossings forced choices between patience and risk. Waiting for safer conditions meant burning supplies. Rushing meant losing them. Along the way, small skills became priceless. A person who could mend leather, set a bone, or find a hidden seep might save strangers. The trail demanded cooperation, yet it also exposed how quickly fear could fracture a group. The Mormon Trail helped build a new society around the Great Salt Lake. When persecution and pressure made staying impossible, a religious community chose migration as survival. The journey west became an organized effort that blended faith with logistics. Groups planned departure times, shared supplies, and assigned responsibilities because a scattered party could fail fast. Some walked beside wagons. Others pulled handcarts that turned each mile into a test of endurance. When they reached the Great Basin, they faced a stark landscape that demanded invention. They dug irrigation ditches, timed planting, and built cooperative systems for labor and food storage. Settlements spread through a network of towns designed to support each other with trade and mutual aid. Visitors were often surprised by how quickly order appeared in such a harsh place. The trail's legacy is not only the movement itself. It is the idea that a society can be deliberately built with shared rules and shared sacrifice, far from centers of power. The Donner Party tragedy exposed how one wrong turn could be fatal. The disaster did not begin with cruelty. It began with optimism, a late start, and a decision to gamble on a new route that promised shorter travel. That choice led the group into rough country, where wagons struggled, animals tired, and time slipped away. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, winter closed in like a door. Snow buried trails and trapped people in makeshift shelters. Food ran out. Strength failed. Desperation forced choices that still unsettle the imagination. Yet the story also holds moments of courage and care. People shared scraps, tended the sick, and tried again and again to break through the mountains for help. Rescue parties eventually arrived, but not in time for everyone. The tragedy became a warning passed from mouth to mouth. It taught later travelers to respect timing, terrain, and the cost of trusting untested promises. The Pony Express lasted only months, yet became a legend. For a brief moment, speed depended on human nerve and relentless coordination. Riders carried a small leather mail pouch, changed horses at stations, and pushed across plains and deserts with almost no pause. Each rider had to know the route by heart, since hesitation could mean losing the trail in darkness or weather. The system relied on fresh horses spaced along the way, and on station keepers who maintained food, tack, and readiness at all hours. The job was dangerous. Riders faced exhaustion, injury, and the risk of robbery or attack. Yet the reward was something astonishing for the time. Messages that once took weeks could cross vast distance in days. Newspapers praised the daring, and the public fell in love with the idea that a nation could feel smaller through sheer effort. The legend outlived the business. It became a symbol of grit, urgency, and a hunger for connection. Telegraph lines made the Pony Express obsolete almost immediately. The telegraph did not need a horse, a rider, or a stopping place for sleep. It needed wire, poles, skilled crews, and stations that could send coded pulses across vast space. Building those lines across the West was its own epic. Workers hauled materials through deserts, over rivers, and into mountains where storms snapped poles like twigs. Crews repaired breaks caused by weather, fire, and sabotage. Once operating, the effect was revolutionary. Information moved at near instant speed, reshaping business, politics, and even personal grief. A family could learn of a birth or death in time to respond, rather than receiving news after the moment had passed. Markets reacted faster. Military commanders coordinated more quickly. The West became more tightly connected to Eastern power centers because messages could arrive without delay. The Pony Express became a romantic memory, but the telegraph became a new nervous system for the nation. Forts across the frontier doubled as towns, supply hubs, and prisons. A frontier fort was rarely only a cluster of soldiers behind walls. It was often the first stable presence in a region where everything else was temporary. Supply wagons arrived with food, ammunition, and uniforms, and they also brought merchants, laborers, and families chasing opportunity. Traders set up nearby because soldiers needed boots, whiskey, and repairs. Soon a rough town could form beside the parade ground, with laundries, blacksmiths, and crowded boarding houses. Forts also became places of confinement. Captured people might be held there, and treaty delegates might be pressured there, surrounded by armed authority. The daily rhythm mixed routine with sudden alarm, since raids, misunderstandings, and shifting orders could turn quiet days into violence. Over time, some forts faded when the frontier moved. Others became the seeds of modern cities, leaving street grids and place names that still echo their military beginnings. Army scouts often relied on native knowledge of terrain and water. Military maps could show mountains and rivers, yet they rarely captured what mattered most in survival. Where is the spring that still runs in drought? Which canyon becomes a trap after rain? Which ridge gives a safe view without exposing a camp? Scouts who understood these details could decide whether a column marched confidently or stumbled into disaster. Many armies hired native scouts, and their work shaped routes, timing, and strategy. Their guidance could prevent entire groups from running out of water or from being surprised in hostile ground. This reliance created complicated relationships. Some scouts worked to protect their own people from worse outcomes. Others sought advantage against rival nations or enemies. They were often treated as essential in the field, then dismissed or mistrusted in politics afterward. Listening to their role changes the story of Western conflict. It reveals that the land itself was a kind of language, and the best speakers had lived with it for generations. The Blackfoot Confederacy controlled huge trade networks across the northern plains. Their power was not only in hunting or war. It was also in knowing how to move value across distance. Traders carried goods along river corridors and over passes that outsiders struggled to read. Horses, hides, pemmican, tools, and stories traveled with purpose, and the right exchange could strengthen an alliance as surely as any treaty. Outsiders often imagined the plains as empty space, yet the Blackfoot world was threaded with meeting places, protocols, and expectations about respect. When new trade goods arrived, including firearms and metal tools, the balance of power could tilt quickly, and skilled negotiators mattered as much as skilled riders. Control of access points shaped who could pass safely and who could not. This was economics, diplomacy, and strategy woven together. To understand the northern plains, you have to see trade as a form of governance. The Comanche built an empire on horseback across the southern plains. Horse culture turned distance into advantage, and the Comanche used it with astonishing sophistication. Mobility meant they could follow bison, strike quickly, and withdraw before an enemy could respond. It also meant they could influence trade across wide regions, since merchants and neighboring peoples had to reckon with Comanche power to move goods safely. Captives and adopted outsiders became part of a changing society, and networks of kinship helped hold that world together. Spanish, Mexican, and later American authorities struggled to control a landscape where Comanche riders could appear and vanish with speed that felt unreal. Their strength was not only force, it was organization, intelligence gathering, and a sharp understanding of resources like water and grazing. For a long time, their decisions shaped who could settle, who could trade, and who could survive. The southern plains were not simply contested. They were, in many ways, directed. The Lakota expanded westward after gaining horses and new alliances. A single change in mobility can alter a nation's future, and horses helped open that door. With faster travel and stronger hunting capacity, Lakota groups could move into new territories, build relationships, and challenge rivals. Expansion was not only conquest. It was also diplomacy, marriage ties, and shared ceremonies that turned neighbors into partners. The buffalo economy grew in importance, and success on the hunt meant food, clothing, and trade goods that supported larger communities. As newcomers pushed from the east, pressure increased across the plains, and choices became sharper. Where can you live with safety? Who will respect your boundaries? Which river valley will sustain you through winter? The Lakota story is often reduced to famous battles, yet the deeper drama lies in adaptation. They read opportunity and danger with precision, and they acted before the world closed around them. The Nez Perce flight in 1877 covered stunning distances. It began as a desperate attempt to avoid forced removal, and it became one of the most grueling long-distance retreats in American history. Families traveled with children, elders, horses, and limited supplies, while soldiers and militias pursued them across mountains and open country. Decisions had to be made fast. Do you cross a river now, or wait? Do you seek allies or keep moving? When fights erupted, the goal was often escape rather than conquest. The route cut through landscapes that demanded endurance, including high passes and wide plains where visibility could turn dangerous. Along the way, some outsiders expressed admiration for their skill and discipline, even while pursuing them. Near the Canadian border, exhaustion and cold closed in, and surrender followed. The story holds heartbreak, but it also holds extraordinary planning under pressure. It forces you to imagine what it means to carry a whole community through flight. The Navajo Long Walk forced thousands into Bosque Redondo captivity. Removal was not a single event. It was a long, punishing process that used hunger, fear, and destruction to break resistance. After campaigns that burned crops and seized livestock, many Dene families were compelled to march great distances to a reservation experiment at Bosque Redondo. The journey itself was brutal, with cold nights, scarce food, and violence along the way. At the destination, the promised refuge often became suffering. Water could be poor, crops failed, and disease spread in crowded conditions. People who had lived with the rhythms of their homeland were trapped far from familiar sacred places and resources. Yet cultural strength endured through language, stories, and community care, even in confinement. Eventually, leaders negotiated for return, and many came home to rebuild. The legacy is not only trauma, it is survival, and a reminder that policy can be a weapon. Hearing this story changes how you think about the word relocation. The Apache Wars were shaped by desert geography and shifting borders. In the deserts and mountains of the Southwest, geography is never background. It is an active force. Small groups who knew hidden water sources, canyon routes, and seasonal patterns could move in ways that larger armies found almost impossible to predict. Border changes added another layer of complexity, since a line on a map could turn yesterday's refuge into today's trap. The sewers crossed between jurisdictions, and negotiations were tangled by competing authorities. Raids, reprisals, and broken agreements hardened fear on all sides, and civilians often suffered first. The conflict also revealed how survival skills become strategic assets. Knowing where to find shade, how to travel at night, and when to wait out a heat wave could decide life or death. These wars were not only about battles, they were about endurance, intelligence, and the unforgiving logic of arid land. When people describe this period as endless chasing, they are not exaggerating. The landscape itself made that the suit a story. The Sand Creek Massacre became a turning point in Plains conflict. What happened at Sand Creek was not a fair fight, and it was not an accident. A peaceful camp was attacked, and the violence that followed sent shockwaves through the plains. For many native communities, it confirmed a terrifying lesson. Even gestures of peace could be met with betrayal. The aftermath intensified cycles of retaliation and fear, and it widened the gap between negotiation and survival. News of the event reached far beyond the region, and investigations exposed details that horrified many Americans. Yet the damage was already done, since trust once broken is difficult to rebuild on a frontier where weapons are common and rumor travels fast. Sand Creek reshaped choices. Some groups became less willing to approach forts or accept promises. Some settlers became more fearful and more supportive of harsh policies. The massacre stands as a moment when the moral story of westward expansion became harder to deny. It forces listeners to confront how quickly ideology can turn people into targets and how a single atrocity can redirect history. The Battle of Little Bighorn shocked the nation in 1876. In the summer of that centennial year, the United States expected a clear victory, and the news delivered the opposite. A column led by George Armstrong Custer was overwhelmed by a large coalition of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho fighters near the Little Bighorn River. For Americans far away, the loss felt like a rupture in the story of inevitable expansion. Headlines turned the battle into a symbol, and the symbol became fuel. Rather than slowing conflict, the shock helped drive a more determined military response, with pressure that increased across the region. The battle itself is often remembered as a last stand, yet it was also the result of scouting, intelligence, and rapid decisions made in confusing terrain. For native communities, it was a rare moment when unity and strategy produced a dramatic result. Even so, the aftermath was devastating, since reprisals and resource pressure tightened quickly. The event became a hinge in national memory, and it still shapes how people argue about heroism and resistance. Wounded Knee in 1890 marked a brutal end of an era. By that time, many native nations had been confined, their food systems disrupted, and their autonomy attacked through policy and force. In this atmosphere, the ghost dance spread as a movement of hope and spiritual renewal, and it alarmed authorities who feared uprising. At Wounded Knee, a tense confrontation escalated into gunfire, and the killing that followed included many women and children. The scene became a symbol of the terrifying imbalance of power at the close of the so-called Indian Wars. Afterwards, medals were awarded to some soldiers, and that fact has remained bitterly contested, since commemoration can deepen wounds instead of healing them. The tragedy also became a marker in the national imagination. It suggested that a long chapter of open conflict had closed, but it did not mean peace had arrived. Instead, the fight shifted into courts, schools, and bureaucracies. Wounded Knee forces you to notice that endings in history are rarely clean. They are often imposed, and they leave echoes that last for generations. The Dawes Act broke communal lands into private allotments and losses. This policy was presented as a path toward assimilation, yet its mechanics made dispossession likely. Reservation lands held in common were divided into individual parcels, and many of those parcels ended up out of native hands through sales, fraud, debt, or bureaucratic pressure. The shift did more than reduce acreage. It disrupted social structures built around collective responsibility and shared use of grazing, hunting, and farming space. Families were often pushed into a property system that did not match their traditions, and they faced legal traps that outsiders could exploit. The act also created a patchwork landscape. Private parcels, trust lands, and non-native ownership became interwoven, making governance and daily life more complicated. Loss was not always immediate, but it accumulated. Over time, the result was a dramatic shrinkage of indigenous land bases in the United States. The Dawes Act shows how a law can reshape a people's future without firing a shot, and how paperwork can be as destructive as war. Chinese workers were essential to building Western railroads through granite and snow. They took on some of the most dangerous work on the line, and they did it under brutal pressure to keep the track moving. In the Sierra Nevada, crews blasted tunnels through solid granite, often hanging in baskets on cliff faces to place explosives. Winter added another enemy. Snowstorms buried camps, and avalanches could erase a work site in minutes. Many Chinese laborers organized their own supply systems, cooking, washing, and care networks that kept crews functioning when conditions turned lethal. They also brought discipline to an industry that demanded exact timing, since a delayed section could stall an entire project. Pay was often lower than for white workers, and the risk was rarely matched by recognition. Yet when the rails finally crossed the mountains, the achievement rested on thousands of hands that history tried to overlook. The railroad story changes when you name who made it possible. Anti-Chinese violence scarred Western towns, including expulsions and massacres. As economic fears rose, Chinese communities became targets for blame, but had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with power. In some towns, mobs smashed businesses, burned homes, and attacked people who had built lives through years of labor. Expulsions could happen overnight. Notices were posted, threats followed, and families fled with what they could carry. Some attacks ended in mass killings, with little accountability afterward. The violence did not stay local, because newspapers spread stereotypes that made cruelty feel acceptable. These events also reshaped the West's geography. When the Chinatown was forced out, an economy changed. Laundry work, farming, cooking, and trade networks were torn apart, and survivors had to rebuild in places that offered fragile safety. This history matters because it exposes how quickly a community can be declared unwelcome, even after it has helped build the region's infrastructure. It also explains why exclusion became law and why memory remains raw. Spanish missions reshaped California through forced labor and cultural upheaval. The mission system aimed to convert and control. It gathered indigenous people into compounds where daily life was regulated by bells, schedules, and punishment. Traditional foodways shifted as fields were replanted with European crops, and livestock herds changed the land's ecology. Disease spread rapidly in crowded conditions, and the loss of life was catastrophic. Families were separated, languages were suppressed, and ceremonies were restricted, yet cultural endurance persisted in quiet forms. Skilled work also expanded inside mission walls. People were taught trades like blacksmithing, carpentry, and weaving, which tied labor to the mission economy. The missions later became romantic symbols in popular culture, but that softness hides the coercion that powered them. When Mexico secularized the missions, lands were redistributed again, and many indigenous survivors were left without protection or resources. California's early colonial history is not a gentle origin story. It is a story of control, resistance, and lasting consequences. The Pueblo Revolt proved native resistance could drive colonizers out. In the late 17th century, Pueblo communities coordinated across distance and language, and they prepared in secrecy despite intense surveillance. The goal was clear: end the violence, end the forced labor, and reclaim sacred practices that had been punished. When the uprising began, it moved with speed and determination. Settlements fell, missionaries were killed, and Spanish survivors fled toward the south. For more than a decade, the Pueblo people restored their own governance and rebuilt spiritual life on their terms. The Spanish eventually returned, but the return was not a simple reset. The revolt forced changes because colonial authorities had learned that domination carried a price. The story is breathtaking because it challenges the idea that colonization always rolled forward without pause. It also highlights planning, alliance building, and the power of shared purpose. When you hold this moment in mind, later conflicts look different. Resistance was not rare. It was organized, strategic, and sometimes successful. Mexican vaqueros created the core skills of American cowboy culture. Long before the English word cowboy became famous, vaqueros developed the techniques that made large-scale ranching possible in open country. They refined roping methods, trained horses for quick turns, and built saddles and gear designed for long days in the sun. Many familiar terms came with them, including rodeo traditions, and words rooted in Spanish. Their work demanded finesse, not brute force. A skilled rider could guide a restless herd with calm control, using position and timing rather than chaos. As Anglo ranching expanded, vaquero knowledge spread, sometimes through cooperation and sometimes through exploitation. The popular image later shifted, and the origin story was often rewritten to center white figures. Yet the craft itself carried its history, stitched into tack, technique, and vocabulary. When you picture a lasso spinning, you are seeing a tradition shaped by Mexican expertise and frontier adaptation. The American West did not invent cowboy culture from nothing. It inherited it, then repackaged it. California's land grants fueled bitter legal battles after statehood. After California became part of the United States, older land titles did not simply translate into security. Many California families held ranchos under Spanish and Mexican grants, yet proving ownership in American courts could be expensive, slow, confusing. Cases dragged on for years. Legal fees piled up, translators were needed, and boundaries that had once been understood through landmarks now demanded surveys and paperwork. Squatters moved in while owners fought in court, and pressure mounted as property taxes and debt came due. Even when a family won, the victory could be hollow if the land was already broken up or mortgaged. These battles reshaped who controlled wealth in California, and they accelerated the transfer of property into new hands. The conflict was not only legal, it was cultural, since a ranching world built on relationships and customary practices collided with an American system that rewarded documentation, capital. This is one reason why the West's story is not only about pioneers arriving. It is also about people losing what they already had. The gold rush created San Francisco's explosive growth almost overnight. A sleepy port became a feverish city because it sat at the edge of the gold country's supply line. Ships arrived faster than the town could handle, and some were abandoned in the harbor as crews ran for the hills. Streets filled with tents, rough shacks, and businesses that charged astonishing prices for storage, meals, and tools. With so many newcomers, the city became a crossroads of languages and ambitions. It also became dangerous. Fires swept through crowded neighborhoods, and rebuilding happened with urgency rather than safety. The waterfront expanded as people dumped sand and debris to create new land, and the shoreline itself shifted under human pressure. Fortunes were made without ever mining, because provisioning miners could be more reliable than chasing a claim. San Francisco's identity as a place of reinvention began here, in a rush of money, risk, and constant arrival. The city did not grow slowly. It erupted, and the shockwave still shapes its character. Mining camps invented local justice systems that could be swift and harsh. A camp could spring up in a canyon with no judge, no jail, and no clear authority. Yet disputes arrived immediately. Who owned a claim? Who stole a mule? Who skipped out on a debt? In response, miners created rules, held meetings, and chose committees to enforce decisions. Sometimes the results were practical and fair, at least by local standards. Other times they were terrifying, since fear and rumor can become evidence when a crowd wants closure. Trials might happen in a saloon, with witnesses shouting over each other, and punishments could be decided in minutes. The system reflected the camp's priorities. Protect claims, keep work going, and discourage violence that would scare away investment. These improvised courts also reveal something important about frontier life. People did not wait passively for government to arrive. They built institutions on the spot, using whatever values and prejudices they carried with them. In mining towns, justice was a tool for survival, and sometimes a weapon for control. Boomtowns rose on ore and vanished when the vein ran out. A rumor of a strike could bring 1,000 people to a hillside in a week. First came tents and cookfires. Then came saloons, assay offices, and hastily built hotels where fortunes were promised between card games. Newspapers appeared to boost confidence, and speculators sold shares in claims that existed mostly as hope. When the ore was rich, money poured through the streets. Lumberyards, theaters, and grand houses followed, and a town could start calling itself a city. Then the geology changed. A vein pinched out. Water flooded a shaft. Costs rose faster than returns. Workers left, and businesses shuttered almost as quickly as they had opened. Wind and weather took over, peeling paint and collapsing roofs until only foundations remained. These ghost towns are not just curiosities. They are physical lessons about extractive economies and about how human dreams can be tethered to a thin seam of metal hidden in rock. The West is full of places that once felt permanent until the earth said otherwise. Hydraulic mining tore apart hillsides and forced new environmental laws. In California's gold country, miners learned to aim high-pressure water at whole banks of gravel and wash them into sluices in search of tiny flakes. The method was spectacular and devastating. Hillsides collapsed into mud, rivers filled with sediment, and downstream farms and towns suffered floods and buried fields. The damage did not stay in the mountains. It traveled with the current, choking channels and raising riverbeds until winter rains became disasters. This conflict produced a rare kind of courtroom drama. Farmers and merchants fought mining companies, arguing that profit upstream was destroying life downstream. When judges finally acted, restrictions followed that helped define early environmental regulation in the United States. The struggle was not only about scenery. It was about property, public safety, and the idea that one industry should not be allowed to ruin a whole watershed. Hydraulic mining shows that the West's history includes an early battle over environmental limits, long before modern conservation became a common word. The Timber Culture Act tried to turn trees into proof of ownership. On the treeless plains, lawmakers imagined a simple logic. If settlers planted forests, the land would become stable, productive, and settled for good. The policy offered extra acreage to anyone who could grow and maintain trees for a set period. On paper, it sounded like hope with roots. In reality, many homesteaders faced brutal winds, thin soils, hungry livestock, and fires that could erase years in a single afternoon. Seedlings died before they could take hold, and water was often too precious to spare for a grove. Some people still tried, building windbreaks and shelter belts that changed how farms survived winter. Others exploited loopholes, filing claims they never intended to nurture. The act reveals a dream of engineering the West into an eastern landscape, even when climate and ecology refused to cooperate. It is a story of ambition, stubborn weather, and policy meeting reality. The Desert Land Act encouraged irrigation schemes across arid basins. The law promised that dry ground could become private property if you could bring water to it. That condition sounded fair until you picture the work. Canals had to be dug, dams had to be built, and disputes began the moment a ditch crossed another person's claim. Investors and speculators moved in fast, since paperwork could be easier than actual irrigation. Some projects were sincere and impressive, turning alkaline flats into orchards and fields through cooperative labor. Others were paper empires, based on exaggerated plans and the hope that someone else would pay to finish the ditches. The act also encouraged a new kind of power in the West. Control of water infrastructure could matter more than control of land itself. The desert did not become tame, but it became contested in a new way. This policy helped set the stage for the West's long argument over who gets water and who pays to move it. Water rights in the West often followed first use, not land ownership. In much of the arid West, water could not be treated like rain in a humid place. It was too scarce, and it did not fall where farms needed it most. So a different rule took hold. Whoever first diverted water for a beneficial use could claim a priority right to keep using it. That system rewarded early arrival and constant use, and it created a pecking order that could last for generations. In drought, senior rights holders might keep flowing water while later users faced empty ditches. The arrangement also shaped settlement patterns, since towns and farms clustered around reliable diversions. It could encourage waste too, because people feared that conserving might weaken their claim. Court cases and local agreements tried to define fairness, yet the basic tension remained. This is why water disputes in the West can feel older than the people arguing. The law remembers who turned the first shovel. The Colorado River became the most fought-over waterway in America. It runs through some of the driest country on the continent, yet it supports farms, cities, and entire economies that depend on its flow. The river's water was divided through compacts, contracts, and promises that assumed a generosity nature does not always provide. As population grew, every drop gained political weight. Upstream and downstream states argued over obligations. Cities invested in canals and pipelines that moved water far from the riverbanks. Farmers defended long-established uses that kept food on tables nationwide. Tribal nations pressed for rights that had been overlooked or delayed. Environmental needs entered the conversation too, because a river can be exhausted if it is treated only as plumbing. The result is a constant negotiation, shaped by drought, law, and engineering. The Colorado is not merely a geographic feature. It is a living test of how a modern society shares scarcity. When you follow its course, you also follow the map of Western power. The Reclamation Act pushed massive dams and canals into dry country. At the turn of the 20th century, the federal government embraced a bold promise. Water could be stored, redirected, and delivered, and the desert could bloom into stable communities. The Act created a system to fund and build irrigation works, often on a scale no local group could afford. Engineers studied river flows, chose dam sites, and designed canals that could stretch for miles across rough terrain. The projects changed daily life, since farms could plan around scheduled deliveries rather than uncertain rainfall. They also changed ecosystems, since seasonal floods were tamed and wetlands shrank. New towns grew where water arrived, and older places sometimes declined when they were bypassed. These projects were celebrated as progress, yet they also sparked arguments about who benefits and who bears the costs. The Act helped create the modern West of irrigated agriculture and fast-growing cities. It also locked the region into infrastructure that must be maintained forever. When a dam rises, it reshapes time itself. The Los Angeles Aqueduct remade a city by draining distant valleys. Los Angeles was growing fast, and local supplies could not match its ambitions. The solution was to reach far beyond the city's natural watershed and bring water south through an aqueduct that crossed mountains and desert. The engineering was remarkable, and so was the politics behind it. Land deals, secrecy, and public persuasion all played roles in making the project possible. In the source region, many residents watched their future change. Water that once fed local farms and lakes was diverted, and conflict followed that still defines the area's memory. For Los Angeles, the aqueduct became a growth engine. It allowed more homes, more industry, and a vision of endless expansion. It also set a pattern that other Western cities would follow, which is the idea that distant water can be claimed through planning and power. The story is not only about pipes and concrete. It is about who gets to decide where a river belongs. When water moves, politics moves with it. The Dust Bowl pushed many families west, chasing survival in California. In the 1930s, drought and wind turned parts of the Great Plains into a landscape of dust storms that could blot out the sun. Farms failed, banks foreclosed, and families packed what they could into battered vehicles. California became a beacon, advertised by rumor and by the hope of paid work. The journey was often miserable. Engines overheated, tires blew out, and the road offered long days of uncertainty. Arrival did not guarantee safety. Migrants faced crowded camps, low wages, and hostility from locals who feared competition. Still, people kept coming because the alternative was hunger. The movement reshaped California's fields and towns, and it changed American politics by making rural crisis visible to the whole country. The Dust Bowl story is not only weather, it is also land management, economic vulnerability, and the human instinct to move when home becomes unlivable. It reveals how quickly stability can collapse and how migration can become a form of courage. Route 66 became a lifeline for migrants during hard years. The road stitched together small towns, truck stops, and campsites across a long sweep of the country. During the Depression era, it became a corridor of hope for people leaving foreclosed farms and shuttered factories. A family could load bedding, tools, and children into a car that barely ran, then aim for the promise of work in the West. Along the way, the road offered both help and hardship. Some towns welcomed travelers with repair shops and cheap meals. Others turned them away, fearing crime or strain on resources. Nights could be spent in ditches, in makeshift camps, or in crowded motor courts when money allowed. The road also became a kind of moving community, where strangers shared maps, warnings, and spare parts. Route 66 gained its legend because it carried ordinary people through extraordinary pressure. It was not a romantic highway at first. It was a survival route, measured in gallons of gas and miles of stubbornness. Western towns created Chinatowns, barrios, and ethnic enclaves with deep roots. The West was never a single culture spreading into empty space. It was a meeting ground where people from many places built neighborhoods that felt like home. Chinatowns formed around kin networks, mutual aid societies, language, and safety in towns that could be hostile. Barrios grew from Mexican and Mexican-American communities whose presence often predated American borders. Other enclaves emerged too, shaped by rail work, mining, farming, and port cities. These neighborhoods created businesses, newspapers, churches, temples, and festivals that anchored identity in unfamiliar landscapes. They also became targets during times of fear, when outsiders treated difference as a threat. Even then, communities adapted through entrepreneurship and organization, preserving traditions while also shaping the broader region's food, music, labor. If you want the real West, look at its streets, not only its open spaces. The frontier had city blocks, family kitchens, and bilingual signs. It had places where people stayed, not just places they passed through. Vigilance committees sometimes became shadow governments, for better or worse. In fast-growing towns, formal law often arrived late. When theft, corruption, or violence spiked, some citizens decided to act first and ask permission later. They formed vigilance committees that promised order, and they sometimes delivered it by arresting criminals and pressuring officials to behave. In places where courts were weak, this could feel like a rescue. Yet the same structure could become dangerous, since a committee can turn into a private power with no checks. Accusations could replace evidence, and punishment could be decided by men who answered only to their own circle. Politics often hid inside the language of public safety. Rival businessmen could be targeted. Immigrants could be scapegoated. Dissent could be treated as a crime. These groups reveal a deep tension in frontier life. People wanted stability, but they also feared distant authority. When they built their own authority, they risked becoming the very tyranny they claimed to oppose. The West was a place of self-rule, and self-rule could be noble or cruel. The Wild West was partly a media invention sold through dime novels. Cheap paper and dramatic headlines could turn a dusty dispute into national entertainment. Writers in eastern cities often stitched together real names, rumors, and pure imagination, then shipped the story back west as supposed truth. Heroes became taller, villains became darker, and the messy middle of ordinary life disappeared. A cattle town that mostly worried about prices and weather could be described as a permanent gunfight. Readers loved it because the tales offered danger at a safe distance, with clear endings and simple morals. Those stories also shaped how newcomers behaved when they arrived. Some men tried to perform the role they had read about, since reputation could feel like protection. The myth even influenced politics, since voters responded to scary images of lawlessness. The most astonishing part is endurance. Once the Wild West was printed and purchased, it became a lens that kept rewriting the past. Buffalo Bill's shows turned real people into touring legends worldwide. William Coley understood that the West could be packaged, staged, and sold like any other spectacle. His traveling productions used arenas, costumes, and choreographed action to present battles, hunts, and rescues as thrilling pageantry. Audiences watched riders race, sharpshooters perform, and crowds roar on cue. The show recruited people with lived experience, including native performers, and it placed them inside scripts that often flattened complex histories. That tension made the event both extraordinary and troubling. It offered employment and travel for some who had few options, yet it also spread stereotypes across continents. When the show toured Europe, royalty and city crowds met a West that felt authentic because real horses kicked up real dust. The impact was cultural. Millions formed their first mental picture of the American frontier under bright lights and staged music. Long after the tents came down, the imagery stayed. Annie Oakley became an international star through marksmanship and showmanship. She stepped into a world that expected women to be spectators. Then she made precision into performance. Her shooting was not only accurate, it was timed, controlled, and presented with calm confidence that surprised crowds. She could break tiny targets at distance, and she could do it repeatedly, which turned skill into suspense. Audiences came for spectacle, yet many left with a changed sense of what a woman could be on a public stage. She also managed reputation carefully, since fame could invite gossip and doubt. Instead of leaning on swagger, she leaned on professionalism and steady practice. That approach made her harder to dismiss as a novelty. In an era hungry for Western icons, she became one of the most recognizable faces of the touring West. Her story shows that frontier mythology was not only built by men with guns. It was also built by a woman who mastered control. Western photography proved the frontier was real, not just rumor. A photograph could carry proof across thousands of miles, and it could do it without asking the viewer to trust a storyteller. Images of canyons, geysers, rail crews, and crowded camps made the West feel immediate to people who had never left home. The work was not easy. Cameras were heavy, exposure times could be unforgiving, and fragile plates had to survive rough travel. Photographers hauled equipment by wagon, pack animal, and sometimes by sheer stubbornness. The results shaped decisions. Investors studied images of mines and rail lines. Tourists saw landscapes that felt like another planet. Policymakers could be influenced by pictures of dramatic terrain that seemed worth protecting or worth exploiting. Photographs also froze people in time, including native communities facing rapid change. That can be powerful and painful in the same frame. The West became more real because it could be seen, and what is seen is easier to claim. The first national park, Yellowstone, was created in 1872. Setting aside a vast landscape for public benefit was a radical idea in an age focused on extraction. Yellowstone's pizzas, hot springs, and wild valleys inspired awe, yet they also attracted competing interests that wanted private control. The park designation aimed to keep the area from being carved into exclusive holdings, though protection was uneven at first. Early visitors arrived on rough roads, staying in simple accommodations while confronting a place that felt almost unreal. Poachers hunted wildlife and vandals damaged features, which revealed how fragile wonder can be when crowds arrive. The park also carried a deeper history. Since indigenous peoples had long relationships with these lands that were often ignored by federal policy. Over time, Yellowstone became a symbol, and symbols spread. It helped define the notion that natural grandeur could be part of national identity. The West did not only offer resources, it offered places that forced Americans to ask what should be kept and for whom. John Muir's writing helped turn wilderness into a public cause. He did not argue like a surveyor or a politician. He wrote like someone who believed the land could speak, and he invited readers to listen. Through essays and books, he translated distant mountains and valleys into vivid experiences that people in cities could imagine. That emotional bridge mattered, because policy often follows feeling before it follows data. His advocacy also connected wilderness to health and character, suggesting that wild places could restore a tired society. He campaigned for protection, guided influential visitors, and helped build a movement that treated scenery as more than decoration. Yet his era was complicated. Conservation could coexist with displacement, and public parks often ignored native claims and histories. The power of his words still shaped outcomes, even when the outcomes were imperfect. Muir's lasting influence is this. He helped teach Americans that a landscape could be a shared responsibility, not only a private opportunity. The Sierra Club began as a Western conservation movement. It started with a simple conviction, but wild places deserved defenders who were organized, persistent, and public. Members planned outings that built community, and they also pursued political influence through campaigns and legal action. The club helped turn appreciation into pressure, which changed how governments responded to development proposals. Its early work was rooted in the mountains and forests of the West, where rail access and tourism were increasing and threats were growing. The organization's history also reflects shifting values, since conservation goals changed over time and internal debates shaped priorities. It became a place where Americans argued about what nature is for and who gets to decide. Some fights centered on dams, roads, and logging. Others centered on the meaning of wilderness itself. One reason the Sierra Club matters is endurance. Movements often flare and fade, yet this one built institutions that could outlast a single crisis. It shows how the West became a stage not only for conquest, but for organized protection. Western lawmen were often elected and could be removed just as fast. In many towns, a badge depended on popularity, not professional training. A sheriff might win office because neighbors knew him, trusted his family, or feared his temper. That democratic process could create accountability, since a reckless lawman could be voted out. It could also create instability, since elections turned justice into a contest of factions. A man enforcing the law had to balance duty with politics, and that balance could bend decisions in subtle ways. Some officers focused on keeping peace between rival interests, since open conflict threatened business and survival. Others used the badge to settle scores or protect allies. The result was a kind of improvisational governance where legitimacy was always being tested. In that environment, law was not only a code, it was a relationship between a community and the person holding authority. When you hear about a famous marshal, it helps to remember that his power could be temporary, and his position could vanish with the next vote. Some outlaws were local celebrities, backed by friends and family networks. Crime on the frontier rarely looked like a lone rider against the world. It often depended on shelter, food, rumors, and quiet assistance from people who shared kinship or grudges. In some communities, an outlaw could be treated as a folk hero if he embarrassed a disliked company or defied an unpopular authority. That support could be practical, like hiding a horse, or it could be social, like refusing to talk to deputies. Yet celebrity was risky. The more famous a criminal became, the more pressure built for capture, and the more betrayal tempted those nearby. Newspapers amplified the drama, sometimes exaggerating the outlaw's code of honor while ignoring victims. This created a strange feedback loop. Myth encouraged attention, attention encouraged pursuit, and pursuit encouraged more myth. Understanding that network makes the West feel less like a string of isolated showdowns. It becomes a story of community loyalties, local economics, and the dangerous romance of defiance. The Pinkertons chased criminals across state lines before modern federal policing. Before national law enforcement worked the way we imagine today, private detective agencies filled gaps that local sheriffs could not cover. The Pinkertons built files, used informants, and pursued suspects beyond county borders, which felt almost like a new kind of power. Railroads and banks hired them to protect money, cargo, and reputations, especially when trains carried valuables across long distances. Their methods could be effective, and they could also be feared, since private agents were not always restrained by public oversight. The agency became involved in labor conflict as well, which made it a lightning rod for controversy. To some, they represented order and professionalism. To others, they represented corporate muscle, wearing the mask of justice. Their work changed expectations. People began to assume that pursuit could be continuous, organized, and data-driven, even across vast territory. In the West, that shift mattered, because distance had once been a form of protection. The Pinkertons helped shrink that distance. The cattle kingdom relied on railroads, refrigerated shipping, and Eastern money. A ranch could raise thousands of animals, yet it could not become an empire without connections far beyond the range. Rail lines turned distant grass into beef on a city plate because cattle could be loaded and moved at speed to slaughterhouses and markets. Refrigerated rail cars then changed what fresh could mean, since meat could travel farther without spoiling. Investors in the East funded ranching companies, betting that open land and cheap labor would turn into dependable profit. That outside money also brought new expectations, since accountants wanted numbers that weather did not always respect. The West began to feel less like a separate world and more like a supplier in a national machine. A cow might spend its life under wide sky, yet its value was set by prices and decisions made in distant offices. The cattle kingdom was not only riders and herds. It was logistics, capital, and a rapidly tightening web of transportation. The Great Die-Up of 1886 shattered many ranching empires. After years of expansion, some ranchers believed the range could feed endless herds, and they stocked it accordingly. Then the weather turned hard in a way that exposed every weak assumption at once. Summer drought left grass short. Winter arrived early, and storms buried forage under deep snow and ice. Cattle that had been pushed too hard or that lacked shelter began to starve where they stood. Fences and drifts blocked movement toward better grazing, so animals clustered and died in terrible numbers. When spring thaw came, the plains revealed miles of carcasses, and the smell of loss lingered long after. The financial impact was brutal. Credit collapsed. Companies folded. Men who had been confident barons became debtors overnight. The die-up forced a change in ranching practices, pushing the industry towards smaller herds, stored feed, and more controlled grazing. Nature delivered the final audit, and it did not negotiate. Range wars often started over water, grass, and contested boundaries. On the plains and in the high desert, the real treasure was not always gold. It was a reliable spring, a river crossing, or a patch of grass that stayed green into late season. When land was unfenced or poorly surveyed, two ranchers could claim the same stretch, and neither would back down. Add a drought year, and the tension sharpened into something personal. One side might move cattle onto disputed ground at night. The other might respond by driving them off, or by cutting fences, or by hiring armed men to protect a boundary that existed mostly in their mind. Sometimes the conflict was between small operators and big outfits that tried to control an entire valley. Sometimes it was between newcomers and families who believed they had earned priority by long use. The violence could look chaotic, yet the cause was simple. Survival resources were limited, and pride made compromise feel like defeat. The Lincoln County War revealed how business feuds could become blood feuds. In New Mexico, rival economic powers struggled for control of contracts, credit, and local politics, and the fight spilled into open violence. Merchants, lawmen, and officials were drawn into opposing camps, and the badge itself could become a weapon of faction. When arrests were made, people questioned whether they were justice or strategy. When killings happened, each side claimed self-defense, and each death demanded an answer. The conflict drew in figures who later became famous, including a young man remembered as Billy the Kid. For locals, it was less legend and more exhaustion, since normal life becomes impossible when gunfire decides who holds authority. The war showed that the West's violence was not always random. It could be organized, financed, and tied to profits that had nothing to do with cattle or gold. The Lincoln County War was a warning about power without restraint. When business controls law, a community can become a battlefield. Tombstone's famous gunfight lasted seconds, but echoed for generations. In a boomtown built on silver money and sharp tempers, tension gathered between factions that did not trust each other. When the confrontation finally happened near the OK Corral area, it was over quickly, and it left several men dead or dying. The aftermath mattered as much as the shots. Court hearings tried to define who acted lawfully and who acted as killers, and public opinion split along lines of loyalty and fear. Newspapers helped turn the event into a national story, and that story kept changing with each retelling. Over time, the gunfight became a shorthand for frontier justice, even though the real causes were local and tangled. The legend also shaped tourism and popular culture, making a specific alley of conflict stand for an entire era. Tombstone teaches a strange lesson. A brief burst of violence can become larger than the lives involved, and memory can keep firing long after the smoke clears. Deadwood mixed gold, gambling, and politics in a lawless rush. Gold in the Black Hills drew people who were willing to break rules, and the town that followed grew faster than governance could keep up. Prospectors arrived with dreams, and businesses arrived with ways to take their money, including saloons, gaming tables, and high-interest loans. That blend created an atmosphere where every deal felt urgent, and every argument could turn into a weapon. Politics quickly became part of the hustle. Whoever controlled permits, protection, and claims could steer wealth in their direction, and corruption found easy footing in a place built overnight. Deadwood also became famous for characters, including Wild Bill Hickok, whose death at a card table fed the town's myth. Yet the deeper story is about improvisation. People tried to build order, while profit pulled them toward chaos. A camp became a town became a symbol, and the symbol often hid the ordinary labor that made it survive. Deadwood was not only wild, it was strategic, crowded, and hungry. Dodge City became a symbol of order imposed on chaos. When rail lines met the cattle trails, the town became a pressure point where money, exhaustion, and alcohol collided. Thousands of longhorns arrived with drovers who had spent weeks on the move, and the town had to absorb that energy without letting it destroy itself. Businesses wanted the trade, but citizens wanted safety, and those goals often fought each other. Lawmen were hired to keep the peace, and their job was as political as it was physical. A crackdown could calm violence, yet it could also scare away customers. The town's reputation traveled fast, and that reputation became part of the economy, since a name like Dodge City could attract risk-takers. Over time, the town learned to manage its own image, balancing toughness with rules that made commerce possible. The symbol outgrew the place. Dodge City came to represent the moment when a frontier town decided it could not survive on disorder alone. Order in the West was not always natural. It was negotiated, enforced, and constantly tested. The Texas Rangers blended myth, policing, and controversial frontier power. They began as a rough force in a turbulent borderland, and they evolved into a symbol that carried both admiration and anger. Rangers tracked raiders, pursued fugitives, and served as a mobile arm of state authority in places where courts were distant. Their effectiveness often relied on local knowledge and relentless pursuit, and that fed the legend of fearless riders. Yet their history is also marked by abuses, including violence and intimidation directed at Mexican and Mexican-American communities. That dual reality matters, because myth can erase victims while celebrating power. The Rangers operated in an environment shaped by border conflict, land disputes, and political pressure, which made accountability difficult when they crossed beat lines. Over time, reforms attempted to professionalize the force, but the legacy remained complicated. Their story reveals a central theme of the West. Institutions that promise safety can also carry prejudice, and a badge can become both protection and threat, depending on who is standing in front of it. Western stagecoaches carried mail, gold, and news through dangerous corridors. A stagecoach was a small moving target, loaded with what people valued most, and it traveled roads that were often little more than ruts. The schedule mattered because mail connected towns to the wider world, and a missed delivery could mean lost contracts, delayed payments, or families left in worry. Coaches bounced through heat, mud, and snow, stopping at stations where fresh horses waited and passengers grabbed quick meals. The cargo made them tempting. Gold shipments attracted robbers, and even a rumor of valuables could invite an ambush at a narrow pass. Drivers had to manage speed and caution, while guards watched the horizon and weighed every approaching rider. Accidents were also common, since a broken wheel on a descent could end in disaster. For many communities, the stage was the first reliable pulse of connection. When it arrived, people gathered for letters and headlines, and a remote town felt briefly less alone. The stagecoach era shows how communication and risk once rode the same road. Wells Fargo built trust by moving valuables across vast distances. In a region where banks were scarce and theft was common, trust became a product that had to be earned. Wells Fargo offered a promise that money, gold dust, and important documents could travel with better odds of arrival. The company built networks of offices and agents, and it used strongboxes, receipts, and procedures that gave customers a sense of predictability. Stagecoaches and wagons carried their shipments, and armed guards sometimes rode along, because reputation could collapse after one high-profile loss. Merchants used the service to pay suppliers. Miners used it to send earnings home. Families used it to move savings when they were starting over in a new town. The brand became a kind of portable confidence in an unstable landscape. That confidence also created targets, since criminals knew where value was concentrated. Wells Fargo did not eliminate risk. It organized it, priced it, and made long-distance commerce feel possible. In the West, that was a powerful form of infrastructure. The fur trade shaped early Western maps through rivers, passes, and tribes. Long before official survey teams arrived, fur traders were already learning the continent's hidden shortcuts. Beaver pelts and other furs were valuable enough to pull people deep into unfamiliar country, where a wrong turn could mean starvation. Traders built knowledge the practical way. They followed river systems like highways, searched for low passes through mountain walls, and memorized where game was reliable in hard seasons. Just as important, they relied on native nations for permission, guidance, and trade, since no outsider could simply wander through another people's homeland without consequence. Over time, this travel created an informal geography of the West, drawn from experience rather than paperwork. Routes that worked got repeated, and repetition turned them into shared corridors. Later explorers and settlers often followed these same pathways, sometimes without realizing they were stepping into a much older network of movement and call. Exchange. Mountain men opened routes later used by settlers and rail crews. They traveled light, lived hard, and measured the West by what could keep you alive. Mountain men trapped beaver, traded hides, and moved through valleys that were unknown to most Americans of their time. They learned where rivers split, where snow lingered late, and where a person could cross a mountain range without being trapped by cliffs. Their gatherings at rendezvous sites became temporary cities of commerce, where goods, gossip, and partnerships changed hands in a few intense days. Some of these men later became guides for expeditions and wagon trains, because they carried mental maps built from cold nights and near misses. When rail planners looked for practical routes, the logic often matched what trappers already knew. You can draw a straight line on a map, but a track must obey grades, water, and terrain. In that sense, mountain men did early reconnaissance for the entire nation, paid in danger rather than salary. The Lewis and Clark expedition depended heavily on native diplomacy and guidance. The expedition is often remembered as bold exploration, yet it was also a long series of delicate introductions. Traveling through vast territories meant encountering sovereign nations with their own politics, rivalries, and rules for outsiders. The party needed food, horses, information, and safe passage, and none of those were guaranteed. Meetings required gifts, careful language, and an ability to read tension before it turned violent. In many places, local knowledge made the difference between progress and disaster, since a river bend could hide a portage, and a mounting route could vanish in snow. When the expedition found help, it was often because leaders understood that diplomacy was not optional. It was survival. This reframes the story. The West was not discovered in a heroic vacuum. It was entered, negotiated, and sometimes tolerated by nations who had known these lands for generations and who could decide whether visitors moved forward at all. Sacagawea's presence helped signal peace during critical encounters. In a landscape where a war party could appear without warning, small signs carried enormous meaning. A traveling group that included a woman and a child did not look like a raiding force, and that visual difference could lure suspicion before a single word was spoken. Sacagawea also carried personal history that mattered on the ground, since she recognized places and could connect people through shared knowledge and relationships. At key moments, her ability to help communicate and to interpret the human situation around the expedition supported safer outcomes. Her presence also challenged expectations, because many later retellings turned her into a simple symbol rather than a complex person navigating danger, displacement, and responsibility. The most striking part is how much rested on trust. The expedition's success depended on being read correctly by strangers and on reading those strangers correctly in return. In that tense world, a calm signal could be more powerful than a gun, because it made conversation possible. The California Trail became a main artery once gold fever spread. When news of gold hit, the route to California stopped being a niche path and became a moving river of people. The trail funneled families, fortune seekers, and entire supply trains toward the Sierra Nevada, where timing could decide everything. Too early, and snow blocked the passes. Too late, and winter slammed the door. Along the way, the trail reshaped the interior West by concentrating traffic at specific river crossings, desert springs, and mountain approaches. Businesses appeared where travelers needed repairs, animals, or fresh food, and those waypoints could become towns that outlasted the rush. The journey also tested planning at a new scale. People had to estimate miles, rations, and animal strength while surrounded by competing advice and escalating anxiety. The California Trail was not only a route to riches. It became a conveyor belt of cultural change, bringing languages, tools, and expectations into places that had never seen migration on that volume. A single discovery turned a difficult path into a national obsession. The Gadsden Purchase created today's southern Arizona and New Mexico border. Borders can look inevitable on a modern map, yet many were negotiated like business deals, with surveys and politics deciding where a nation ends. The Gadsden Purchase transferred a strip of land from Mexico to the United States, and one major motivation was practicality. Rail planners wanted a southern route with fewer mountain barriers and a clean line for construction and control. The purchase also altered lives immediately for people already living there, since legal systems, citizenship, and economic ties could change without Team C. Families moving at all. It deepened the sense of a borderland where languages and cultures overlapped, and where authority might feel distant and unstable. The new line also fueled future disputes about enforcement, property, and identity, because a border is never only geography. It is policy made visible. The Gadsden Purchase reminds you that the West was shaped not only by wagons and wars, but by negotiations that turned landscapes into paperwork. The overland mail linked coasts long before rails fully did. Before a person could buy a train ticket across the continent, the mail still had to move, and it had to move on time. Overland mail routes stitched together stage lines, relay stations, and drivers who pushed through heat, mud, and snow. Each stop was a small miracle of logistics, since horses needed feed, coaches needed repairs, and stations needed protection in isolated stretches. The service mattered because information is a kind of power. Business contracts, political orders, and family news all traveled in those bags. A delayed delivery could cost money, shift elections, or leave people stranded without guidance. Overland mail also created a chain of outposts that later travelers depended on, since a station meant water, shelter, and a point on the map that felt cruise. Reliable. The story is thrilling because it shows a nation trying to stay connected while the distance was still enormous. Every trip carried the promise that the country could hold together, one delivery at a time. The first Western newspapers could appear in tents, then influence politics. A printing press was heavy, fragile, and wildly ambitious for a frontier town, which is why its arrival often signaled that a camp was becoming permanent. Editors set type in cramped spaces, sometimes in canvas shelters, while the town outside shouted, fought, and hustled for profit. The paper reported births, fires, prices, and crime, but it also did something more explosive. It took sides. Newspapers promoted certain candidates, attacked rivals, and framed conflicts in ways that could inflame a crowd by morning. In boomtowns, a headline could trigger a run on a bank, a vigilante meeting, or a sudden rush to a new claim. Papers also helped build local identity, since people liked to see their town described as important. Even when stories were exaggerated, they shaped reality by shaping belief. The West was not only built with hammers and rails. It was built with narratives, and newspapers printed those narratives fast. Western schools were battlegrounds over language, religion, and identity. A schoolhouse looks harmless, yet in the West, it often carried the sharp edge of cultural power. As towns formed, families argued about what children should learn and whose values would be treated as normal. Language became a flashpoint in communities with Spanish speakers, native speakers, and immigrants from many countries. Religion mattered too, since curricula and holidays could signal which groups were welcome and which were expected to change. School boards became arenas for local politics, and teachers sometimes found themselves policing behavior as much as teaching reading. For some children, school offered a path into wider opportunity through literacy and credentials. For others, it was a daily lesson that their home culture was considered inferior. These conflicts were not abstract. They shaped names, accents, friendships, and futures. When you study the West through schools, you see that settlement was not only about land. It was also about shaping the next generation's sense of who belonged, and on what terms. Boarding schools targeted native children, aiming to erase cultures by policy. Government and church-run boarding schools took children far from their families, often with coercion, and placed them in institutions designed to reshape identity. Hair was cut. Traditional clothing was replaced. Native languages were punished, and names were changed to fit American expectations. The goal was not education alone. It was transformation, enforced through strict routines and discipline. Many children endured loneliness, illness, and abuse, and the trauma echoed back into communities when they returned. Yet even within these harsh systems, children found ways to resist. They whispered their languages in secret, shared memories, and held on to songs and stories when they could. The long-term effects were deep, including disrupted family ties and lasting grief, alongside resilience and cultural revival that continues today. Understanding this history is essential because it explains why cultural survival in the West required courage long after open warfare had faded. The frontier did not end when the fighting stopped. It continued in classrooms, dormitories, and policy. The ghost dance movement spread hope, then met violent suppression. It began as a message carried from community to community, and it offered a vision of renewal in a time of hunger and confinement. People gathered to sing, to pray, and to dance in circles that could last for hours, holding on to the belief that the world could be made right again. In many places, the movement was less a call to war than a way to survive despair with dignity. Federal authorities and some local officials read it differently. They feared uprising, and they treated spiritual gatherings as a security threat. That fear produced crackdowns, arrests, and panic on the ground, where rumors moved faster than facts. The tragedy is that a practice meant to restore balance became one more reason for coercion. The ghost dance reveals how hope itself can be policed when a government sees cultural strength as danger. It also shows how spiritual life can become a form of resistance, even without a single shot fired. Reservations often placed nations far from sacred sites and traditional food sources. Removal was not only about location. It was about cutting the ties that made a culture livable. Many reservations were set in places that could not support the same hunting, fishing, or farming patterns people had relied on for centuries. A river that once meant salmon might be replaced with dry land and distant ration lines. Sacred mountains and burial grounds might suddenly sit beyond a boundary enforced by soldiers and paperwork. That separation changed daily life in quiet, grinding ways. Seasonal ceremonies became harder to hold, and diets shifted toward unfamiliar foods that did not match health needs or tradition. Dependence grew, and dependence could be used as leverage in negotiations. Even when people adapted with new farming methods or wage work, the emotional cost remained. Place is memory, and place is identity. When policy relocates a nation, it is also relocating its stories, its calendars, and its sense of who it is. Understanding reservations requires seeing geography as a tool of control. The buffalo robe trade enriched some, while accelerating bison collapse. Robes became a form of currency in a rapidly expanding market, and traders treated the herds like an endless warehouse. Winter hides were especially prized, and demand rose in eastern cities where warmth and fashion could be bought by the bundle. On the plains, this commerce pulled more hunters into the business, and it also pulled more middlemen into native economies that were already under pressure. For some, the trade offered needed goods and weapons. For others, it tightened dependency on distant prices and fickle supply chains. As killing intensified, the herds thinned, and the effect was not gradual. It was sudden, like a floor dropping out. With fewer animals, robe wealth turned into hunger and crisis, and communities faced hard choices about whether to keep trading or conserve what remained. The robe trade shows how a market can look profitable right up until it destroys the source of its own prosperity. It also shows how the West was shaped by demand from far away, in places that never saw a bison alive. The Chinese Exclusion Act grew from Western politics into national law. Anti-Chinese agitation did not stay local because Western politicians learned it could win votes. Economic downturns made anger easy to direct, and Chinese workers became scapegoats for problems created by larger forces like Industrial N, consolidation and unstable wages. Campaign speeches painted immigrants as threats to jobs and morality, and those claims hardened into policy proposals. The result was a federal law that restricted immigration in a way that marked a major shift in American legal history. It was more than a border rule. It shaped families, since men already in the United States faced separation from wives and children, and it encouraged harsh enforcement through paperwork, demands, and inspections. Communities adapted by creating protective organizations and legal strategies, yet the law's presence hung over daily life like a permanent suspicion. The act also helped normalize the idea that the nation could target a specific group by race and nationality, then call it governance. In the story of the American West, exclusion is not a side plot. It is central to how power was built and how belonging was defined. The Ku Klux Klan also rose in some Western towns, not only the South. In the early 20th century, the Klan found fertile ground in places where rapid growth created anxiety about identity and control. Western cities were expanding with migrants, immigrants, and new industries, and some residents responded by seeking a movement that promised order through exclusion. The Klan presented itself as moral guardianship, yet its targets were broad, including Catholics, Jews, immigrants, and Black Americans. Parades and rallies turned intimidation into public spectacle, and local politics could be influenced through endorsements, threats, and bloc voting. In some areas, officials were members, which blurred the line between private terror and public authority. The Western Klan also reminds us that intolerance travels easily. It does not require plantations or old regional myths. It can appear wherever people feel entitled to define who counts as real Americans. Recognizing this Western chapter matters because it challenges comforting geography. The struggle over pluralism happened in the West too, on main streets that still exist today. The Great Railroad Strike reached Western cities and exposed class tensions. When rail companies cut wages and tightened conditions, workers across the country reacted. And the disruption did not stop at the Mississippi. In Western cities where rail hubs controlled jobs and prices, the strike became a flashpoint that revealed how dependent towns were on the iron network. Freight stopped moving, and shortages raised stress quickly. Crowds gathered, some in solidarity, some in fear, and authorities faced a question that still feels modern. Do you treat labor protest as a civic dispute or as rebellion? In some places, troops were called. Violence erupted in clashes that left lasting bitterness, and newspapers often framed the conflict as chaos rather than grievance. The strike also made a point about leverage. A single industry could grip the economy so tightly that workers had few tools except collective action. The West is often pictured as individualism, yet rail strikes show how organized labor also shaped Western life. The rails did not only carry goods. They carried conflict, and the conflict could spread as far as the tracks did. Western unions fought mining owners in strikes that turned into armed battles. Mining towns were built around a single fact, and that fact was danger. Underground work could kill through collapse, gas, fire, or slow disease, and wages rarely matched the risk. Unions formed because workers wanted bargaining power over pay, hours, and safety rules that owners resisted as expensive. Tensions rose quickly in isolated camps where the company might own housing, stores, and even local officials. When strikes began, owners sometimes hired armed guards or brought in replacement workers, and the standoff could turn into open violence. In some conflicts, gunfire and explosives replaced negotiation, and the town became a battlefield of barricades, patrols, and fear. Families were caught in the middle, trying to survive while the wage system that fed them collapsed into conflict. These struggles mattered far beyond a single mine, because they tested whether workers had the right to organize in the West's most profitable industries. They also left a legacy of solidarity and trauma that shaped later labor law and political movements across the region. The Ludlow Massacre in Colorado tied coal country to national outrage. Coal camps could feel like company kingdoms, and the power imbalance was stark. When miners and their families went on strike, they often lived in tent colonies because company housing was no longer available. At Ludlow, tensions escalated between strikers, guards, and state forces, and violence erupted in a confrontation that ended in catastrophe. The event became infamous because of who suffered, including families in the camp, and because it revealed how industrial conflict could spill into civilian horror. News traveled widely, and it shook public opinion about corporate power, private security, and the role of the state in labor disputes. The massacre also influenced the language of reform, pushing conversations about protections for workers and families who had little legal shelter. Ludlow is not only a Colorado story. It is a national turning point in how Americans imagined labor struggle and how far a company might go to maintain control. In the wider West narrative, it shows that extraction industries did not only scar landscapes, they scarred communities. The IWW organized workers across Western mines, mills, and fields. The industrial workers of the world aimed for something bigger than a single trade union, and that ambition fit the West's mobile labor force. Many workers moved seasonally from harvest to logging camps to mines, and traditional unions often struggled to organize people who never stayed long. The IWW built campaigns that spoke to that reality, using songs, newspapers, and public speeches that could rally crowds quickly. They pushed the idea that workers across industries shared a common fight, which threatened employers who relied on division by nationality, language, or job type. In response, authorities and companies cracked down with arrests, violence, and laws aimed at speech itself. The battles were not only over wages. They were over whether dissent could be public in a company town. The IWW also left a cultural legacy, since their organizing style made labor politics feel vivid, confrontational, and creative. In the West, where distance and mobility could isolate people, the IWW tried to build a shared identity that traveled with the worker, not the air. Workplace. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was Eastern, but it changed labor nationwide, including the West. When news spread that young garment workers had died because exits were blocked and safety was neglected, it struck a nerve across the country. Western readers did not see it as a distant tragedy. They saw a warning about what happens when profit outruns protection, and they recognized similar hazards in factories, canneries, and packing houses closer to home. Reformers used the event as proof that regulations were not abstract bureaucracy. They were life and death. Labor organizers pointed to it when arguing for building codes, fire escapes, and inspections with real enforcement. Politicians who had dismissed workplace safety as interference faced public pressure that was newly emotional and newly specific. The fire also changed how people told stories about workers. It made their vulnerability visible, and it made the cost of industrial negligence hard to ignore. In the West, where new industries were expanding fast, the lesson landed at a crucial moment. Tragedy became leverage, and leverage became policy, because grief can sometimes do what arguments cannot. The Grange and populists reshaped Western politics through railroad rate fights. When a single railroad could decide what it cost to ship wheat, cattle, or lumber, it could decide who stayed solvent. Farmers watched profits vanish into freight charges, and they realized that individual complaint meant nothing against a monopoly. The Grange built cooperative power first, creating networks where neighbors shared strategies and pushed for regulation. Populists widened the fight, turning anger into a political movement that demanded fair rates, transparency, and public accountability. Meetings filled schoolhouses and town halls, and speeches framed the struggle as ordinary people versus distant corporations. Railroads fought back with lawyers, influence, and warnings that reform would ruin the economy. The battle reshaped Western democracy because it taught voters that infrastructure is political power. It also helped build a new style of campaigning that centered working people, not elites. The West was not only conquered with rails. It also learned to challenge the railroads, and that challenge changed national politics. Western women won voting rights early in places like Wyoming. In several Western territories and states, women gained the vote decades before much of the country, and the reasons were surprisingly practical. Leaders wanted settlers, and they wanted stable communities, so they promoted the West as modern and opportunity-rich. Some also hoped women voters would encourage civic order, since rowdy boomtown politics had a reputation that scared families away. Women activists seized the opening, organizing, speaking, and insisting that citizenship should include political voice. Once voting began, it changed public life in visible ways. Women served on juries in some places, ran for office, and helped steer debates on schools and public health. The change did not end discrimination, and it did not automatically create equality, but it proved that the old argument about readiness was weak. The West became a testing ground where democracy expanded because conditions were fluid and institutions were still being built. In that moment, a frontier often painted as rough also became unexpectedly forward-looking. Wyoming Territory granted women suffrage in 1869. In a place still defining itself, lawmakers made a decision that startled the nation. They extended voting rights to women, and they did it at a time when many Americans still treated the idea as unthinkable. Motives varied. Some saw it as principle. Some saw it as strategy to attract attention and settlers. Whatever the mix, the result was real, and it created immediate consequences. Women registered, voted, and stepped into civic spaces that had been closed to them. The territory gained a reputation as a bold experiment, and the experiment became part of Wyoming's identity. When statehood approached, pressure rose to reverse the policy, yet Wyoming held firm. That refusal mattered because it showed commitment, not a stunt. The state later marketed itself as a place where women mattered politically, and the story spread. Wyoming's decision did not solve the nation's suffrage struggle, but it created a powerful precedent. It proved that women voting was not a fantasy. It was functioning reality on the western frontier. Black cowboys were common, despite being erased from many later stories. After the Civil War, many Black Americans moved into ranching and cattle work, and they became skilled hands on trails and ranches across the West. Some were formerly enslaved men who brought experience with livestock. Others learned the trade in a landscape where ability could matter more than pedigree, at least on the job. They rode night guard, broke horses, handled roping, and managed herds through storms and stampedes. A few became foremen, ranch owners, or celebrated rodeo competitors, building reputations that were well known locally. Yet later, popular culture often edited them out, swapping a diverse workforce for a nearly all-white myth. That erasure changed how people imagined the West, and it changed who felt included in its legacy. Remembering Black cowboys is not about adding a footnote. It is about restoring reality. The cattle industry was a massive labor system, and Black workers were part of its backbone. When you picture the open range, the truth is more varied and more human than the stereotype. The Buffalo Soldiers patrolled western frontiers and fought in major campaigns. After the Civil War, Black regiments in the United States Army were assigned to the West, where they became known as Buffalo Soldiers. Their duties were wide and often relentless. They escorted mail and supply trains, guarded forts, protected settlers and crews, and pursued enemies through harsh terrain where water and timing decided quaff. Survival. They also built roads and telegraph lines, and they served as a steady presence in places that could erupt into conflict overnight. These soldiers faced danger in the field and racism within the institution, including harsh discipline and limited recognition. Even so, many earned reputations for endurance and professionalism, and their service shaped federal control of huge regions. The story is complicated because the Army's mission often meant enforcing policies that harmed native nations, and Black soldiers were part of that machinery. Holding both truths matters. Their history reveals how the West was secured through military labor, and how people seeking dignity and wages could be placed inside morally tangled assignments. Exodusters built new lives in Kansas, then pushed further west. In the years after Reconstruction, many Black families left the South in search of safety, land, and a chance to control their own labor. Kansas became a symbol of possibility, and the migration earned the name Exodusters, echoing a journey out of bondage into a hoped-for promised land. The move was not easy. People arrived with limited money, faced hostile locals in some areas, and struggled with harsh weather and unfamiliar farming conditions. Still, communities formed, churches and schools followed, and mutual aid became a lifeline. Over time, some families pushed farther west, chasing work on railroads, ranches, and in growing towns. This movement reshaped the West in ways that are often overlooked, since it was not driven by gold or cattle alone. It was driven by the search for dignity. The Exoduster story also shows that migration is rarely one leap. It is a series of decisions under pressure, made by people who refuse to accept the place the world assigns them. The Chinese diaspora shaped Western cuisine, farming, and urban life. Chinese immigrants did far more than build railroads. They created businesses that fed towns, cleaned clothes, grew vegetables, and stitched together urban neighborhoods through family associations and shared protection. In many mining and railroad regions, Chinese farmers supplied fresh produce when others focused on quick profit, turning marginal land into reliable pay. Gardens. Restaurants introduced flavors that became local staples, even when the diners held prejudice. In port cities and inland hubs, merchants built import networks that connected the West to the Pacific world, bringing tea, ceramics, and goods that widened ET. Consumer culture. These communities also endured constant hostility, which forced them to develop strong internal systems for dispute resolution, credit, and social power. Support. That resilience shaped how Western cities grew, because enclaves became economic engines as well as cultural anchors. When later generations talk about the West's diversity, this is part of what they mean. The region's everyday life, from food to commerce, was built by immigrant hands that history too often treats as background. Japanese-American farmers transformed agriculture, then faced wartime incarceration. In the early 20th century, many Japanese immigrants and their American-born children became highly skilled farmers, often specializing in intensive crops. That required careful planning and constant labor. They leased land, improved soil, and built efficient operations that could make small acreage productive. Their success sometimes sparked resentment, which fed restrictive laws and local hostility. Then World War II brought a far more severe rupture. Many Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes and farms, and they were incarcerated in camps far from the fields they had built. Property was lost through hurried sales, broken leases, and opportunistic seizure. Families returned to find equipment gone, land transferred, and communities altered. The story is devastating because it combines achievement with sudden dispossession. It also carries resilience, since many rebuilt livelihoods after release, despite immense obstacles. This history matters in the American West because agriculture there depends on expertise and labor, and the region's food system was changed by both the contributions and the losses. The fields remember, even when people try not to. The West's national parks were created through both protection and displacement. The park idea promised public access to spectacular landscapes, yet it often came with a hidden cost. Many areas later labeled pristine were homelands and living cultural spaces, and park creation sometimes meant forced removal or strict limits on traditional hunting, gathering, and ceremony. Families who had seasonal routes found gates, rangers, and new rules that treated their presence as trespass. At the same time, the parks did protect places from private takeover, mining, and development that could have erased them entirely. That double reality makes the story tense and important. Preservation can be a gift, and it can also be an act of control. In parks like Yosemite and Glacier, visitors came to admire grandeur, while indigenous communities fought to remain visible, recognized, and connected to ancestral land. Today, many parks are slowly expanding partnerships and interpretation, yet the original wounds still shape these relationships. When you stand at a famous overlook, you are also standing in a contested history about who belongs in a landscape and who gets to call it public. The Grand Canyon's tourism boom was driven by railroads and curated myth. For many Americans, the canyon became accessible not through hiking grit, but through a ticket and a timetable. Rail companies promoted the canyon as a must-see wonder, then built routes, hotels, and services that could deliver visitors in comfort. Marketing shaped expectations. Brochures framed the canyon as a majestic spectacle, and they often reduced native presence to a romantic backdrop, even though indigenous ties to the region were sour, deep and ongoing. Guides, viewpoints, and scheduled stops turned a vast, complex place into a series of consumable moments. That curation made tourism possible at scale, and it also created a powerful myth about what the canyon means. Visitors arrived looking for the story they had been sold, and businesses learned to satisfy it. The boom reshaped local economies and landscapes, and it helped define the modern American habit of traveling to nature through infrastructure. The Grand Canyon became both a real place and a carefully managed idea, and the tension between those two is part of its history. The land survey grid imposed straight lines on landscapes that were never straight. Surveyors used chains, compasses, and later more precise tools to divide enormous spaces into rectangles that could be bought, sold, and taxed. On paper, it looked clean, yet the ground did not cooperate. A straight township line might cut across a river bend, a canyon, or a steep ridge that no wagon could cross. Those lines still shaped real life because fences, roads, and property disputes followed the map, not the terrain. In some places, the grid ignored older patterns of land use that were based on watersheds, seasons, and community boundaries. In others, errors accumulated, since small measurement mistakes could compound over miles into awkward gaps and overlaps. The most fascinating part is the lasting imprint. If you fly over western farmland today, you can still see the geometry etched into earth and irrigation. It is a reminder that the West was not only conquered by force, it was also reorganized by paperwork and straight lines. Western fossils fueled early dinosaur science and intense museum rivalries. In the late 19th century, bone beds in the West turned into scientific treasure hunts, and the stakes were fame, funding, and priority. Rival collectors raced to claim new species, often in remote badlands where heat, thirst, and distance made every dig a gamble. The work demanded brute strength and delicate skill at once, since a careless swing could shatter a rare specimen. Crews used plaster jackets and wagon transport to move massive bones, sometimes guarding sites against theft because competitors might raid a quarry under cover. Of night, newspapers followed the drama, turning paleontology into a public spectacle that mixed discovery with scandal. The result was both brilliant and messy. Museums filled with towering skeletons that reshaped how people imagined deep time, yet the rush also encouraged secrecy and shortcuts that complicated later research. The West became a laboratory without walls. Its rocks offered a story older than any frontier legend, and the race to read that story changed science itself. The Great Basin's geography created isolated communities and unique survival strategies. This region is a puzzle of valleys and mountain ranges, where water can vanish into salt flats and where travel can be blocked by distance rather than walls. People who lived and moved here had to treat springs as anchors, and they learned routes that connected reliable water like beads on a string. In the historic period, miners and settlers entered the basin expecting a straightforward crossing, then discovered that a map could lie. A valley might look close, yet the mountain between could add days. Towns grew around precious water, and some faded when wells failed or transport shifted. Isolation shaped culture too. Communities developed strong local networks because help might be far away and winter could close roads entirely. The Great Basin story is gripping because it flips the usual frontier image. It is not a land of easy movement. It is a land that teaches patience, careful planning, and humility in the face of aridity and scale. The gold standard debate mattered deeply in silver-rich Western states. To many Western miners and farmers, Currency policy was not abstract economics. It was rent, debt, and survival. When money was scarce and prices fell, a loan could become a trap, since you repaid in dollars that were harder to earn than when you borrowed. Silver producers argued that expanding the money supply could raise prices and ease debt burdens, and they framed it as a fight against Eastern financiers who benefited from tight credit. Political campaigns turned into moral theater, with speeches that treated coinage as a struggle between working people and concentrated power. Western states with big silver interests became loud battlegrounds, and the issue helped shape party identities and election strategies. The debate also revealed how the West was tied to global markets, since metal prices and investor confidence reached into mining camps and wheat fields. It is astonishing to realize that a decision about backing currency could feel as immediate as drought. In the West, money policy was weather for the economy. Western statehood often followed mining booms more than population stability. Some territories pushed for statehood when a rush brought sudden wealth and political urgency, even if communities were still fragile and unevenly settled. Mining camps could swell into cities, produce tax revenue, and demand representation, and that pressure could accelerate the path to statehood. Yet booms are restless. A region might look prosperous on paper while its economy depended on a single ore body that could fail or flood. Legislators and business leaders still pushed forward because statehood meant greater control over laws, land policy, and investment. The mismatch created tension. Governments had to build institutions, courts, and infrastructure, while towns shifted under them. In some places, political power concentrated where mines were richest, leaving ranchers and farmers feeling sidelined. The most interesting part is how quickly identity could be declared official. A state could be born in a moment of confidence, then face hard reality when the boom cooled. This pattern explains why some Western political cultures developed a sharp awareness of cycles and a hunger to secure advantage while it lasted. The Alamo myth grew larger than the complex Texas Revolution reality. The basic outline is famous, yet the story people remember is often cleaner than the history. The Texas Revolution involved competing visions of governance, shifting loyalties, and brutal violence on multiple sides, and the Alamo became one dramatic episode inside a wider conflict. Later retellings turned it into a simple morality tale, and that tale became a tool for identity and politics. Heroes were carved into stone, while inconvenient details were softened or dropped, including the rules of Tejano Texans, the realities of slavery, and the messy bee. Motives that drive revolutions. Popular culture then amplified the legend, making it feel like the whole war instead of one chapter. The fascinating part is the feedback loop. The more the myth spread, the more it shaped how Texans and Americans understood themselves, and the harder it became to speak about nuance without sounding like a prass. Traitor. Studying the Alamo is less about tearing down a symbol. It is about seeing how symbols are built and what they are used for long after the shooting ends. California's vigilantes influenced state politics long after the hangings ended. In periods of rapid growth, some citizens decided official institutions were too slow or too corrupt, and they formed committees that claimed the right to punish. Once a vigilante group demonstrates force, it can reshape politics even after it dissolves, because it changes what people believe is acceptable. California's vigilante movements did more than target criminals. They also pressured officials, influenced elections, and set a precedent that organized private power could stand above formal law. Supporters framed these actions as necessary order. Critics warned that the same machinery could be used against political opponents and marginalized groups. The long-term impact showed up in how leaders talked about crime, corruption, and legitimacy, and in how crowds could be mobilized through fear. It is chilling and fascinating because it reveals a paradox of democracy. People who demand justice can sometimes undermine the institutions that make justice accountable. In California, the memory of vigilantes became part of the political toolkit, a warning and a temptation at the same time. Hollywood westerns reshaped global ideas of the frontier, often distorting truth. Film did not just reflect the West. It reauthored it for audiences who had never seen a prairie or a desert. Directors built a visual grammar of wide horizons, lonely riders, and quick moral clarity, and those images traveled worldwide. The movies often simplified people into types, and that simplification pushed native nations, women, immigrants, and black Westerners to the margins or erased them entirely. Yet the influence was enormous. Tourism, fashion, advertising, and even foreign ideas about American character absorbed the cowboy as a symbol of rugged freedom. The twist is that the symbol fed back into reality. Communities leaned into the imagery to attract visitors, and individuals performed Western identity in ways learned from screens rather than from history. Some filmmakers later challenged the old formulas, showing darker themes and more complex motives. Yet the early template remained powerful. Hollywood's West became a shared dream that could overshadow real lives. Understanding that helps you separate history from the story people wanted to sell. Modern tribal governments use treaties as living law, not old history. Treaties are often discussed like artifacts, yet for many native nations they function as legal foundations that still shape rights, jurisdiction, resources today. Tribal governments negotiate with states and the federal government over fishing, water, policing, land management and economic development, and treaty. Language can be central in courtrooms and policy meetings. This is not symbolic. It affects whether a community can protect a salmon run, regulate a business, or hold authority over a crime case. Modern governance also blends tradition and contemporary administration, with councils, constitutions, courts, and intergovernmental agreements. The most compelling part is continuity under pressure. Despite centuries of attempts to weaken sovereignty through relocation, allotment, and coercive schooling, tribal nations remain political entities with citizens and institutions. That reality challenges the old frontier narrative that treats native history as finished. In the modern West, tribal governance is part of the present tense, and treaties are one reason why. The American West is still being negotiated through land, water, and memory. The biggest conflicts did not vanish when the frontier closed. They evolved into court cases, zoning meetings, water compacts, and battles over what gets taught in schools and museums. Land remains contested through grazing rights, mineral leases, conservation, and the return of certain sites to tribal stewardship. Water grows more urgent as drought and growth collide, forcing cities, farms, and ecosystems into hard trade-offs that feel personal and political at once. Memory is part of the negotiation too. Statues, place names, and public celebrations shape who feels honored and who feels erased. And those choices influence policy because identity influences power. The West is not a single story with a neat ending. It is a region where different histories overlap and where the past is constantly recruited to argue about the future. That is why the American West still matters. It is a living workshop where a nation keeps testing ideas about ownership, fairness, and belonging under a sky that is still very big. As we come to the end of our journey, the American West can begin to settle in your mind like a wide landscape at dusk. We have wandered through deep time and recent memory, across plains shaped by hooves and rails, through deserts carved by water agreements and human will. We have seen how nations rose and adapted, how towns furred into life and sometimes faded back into silence, and how stories were told, retold, and reshaped, until they became part of who we are. The West revealed itself not as a single place, but as layers. Layers of trade routes and survey lines. Layers of hope, conflict, invention, and endurance. Rivers carried more than water. Trails carried more than wagons. Every choice left a mark, whether carved into stone, written into law, or held quietly in memory. Now there is nothing left to follow, and nowhere you need to go. Let your breathing slow as the dust settles. Imagine the land at night, stars stretched across a vast sky, the noise of history easing into stillness. You do not need to hold on to details. They can drift like campfire smoke, rising and thinning, leaving only a sense of scale and calm behind. If you found this journey meaningful, you might consider offering a like, subscribing, or sharing a quiet thought below. It helps this little corner of history reach others who may be winding down too. And if you happen to still be awake, there will be another video waiting for you on the screen, ready to carry you onward at an unhurried pace. But for now, allow your thoughts to soften, your body to rest, and the long story of the West to fade into the background, like a horizon you no longer need to chase. Sleep well, and good night.